Good afternoon and good evening to everyone watching this. Thanks for watching our Amazonas YouTube channel. So this is going to be our first official interview with one of our authors. So I'd like you all to welcome Stephen Grant. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I can't wait to hear more about what you do.
Thank you very much for the invite.
Absolutely. So let's start with you. Can you tell us about your background in the aquarium hobby?
Yeah, I'm 49 this year. I know I probably look a lot older than that, but I am 49, I think. I've been keeping fish probably since I was about 15, 16 years old. The first fish that I bought, first fish I actually saw and bought was a bronze albino Corydoras. And as soon as I saw that fish with its armor and its strange coloration, I was just absolutely hooked. And had to buy it. And I've been keeping fish ever since. I've kept fish, bred fish, I've showed fish, I've judged fish. I got into writing about fish pretty early doors as well, mainly for like what was then the Catfish Association of Great Britain, their newsletter. And then it kind of progressed really into doing magazine articles. I'm now the editor of the Catfish Study Group Journal. And then I ended up, I've done a couple of trips abroad, collecting trips. I've been to Bolivia collecting and to Peru collecting. And over the course of the years since that age, I've done a few, dabbled in some science, some of the scientific side of the hobby. So I became an amateur ichthyologist. And I think we're going to talk about some of those things possibly later. So I've been doing it a long time, obviously not as long as a lot of other people that are in the hobby, but it's really been a big part of my life. It's got me through a lot of tough times in my life in terms of some of the things that I've struggled with. It's given me something to concentrate on and try and take my mind off the bad things really that can happen as you're going through life. So it's a really big positive for me.
That's great. Yeah, it's always nice to hear other stories about how much of a positive influence the aquarium hobby can have on all of us. It's fantastic. So thanks for sharing your background. So people will be able to read one of your articles in the upcoming July-August issue, which is all about your experience discovering and naming some new Corydoras species, which we will definitely get to. But because this can be a bit of a complicated topic, I'm hoping that before we get into that, you can give us sort of an overview of the phylogeny of the Corydoradinae subfamily. And you've given me a lovely graphic to go along with that, thankfully. So I'm going to put that up and then have you talk. So let me grab that because I need more education on the subject as well. So take it away.
So yeah, this is a graphic, as you said, from a paper in 2011 by Alexandru and various other authors. And it shows the cladogram of or the phylogenetic tree of the Corydoradinae. But before we really get to that, I think it's just a good idea just to have a quick overview of where we were before this was published. So if you go back into like 1960s, 1970s, and the 1980s, there were two ichthyologists called Nyssen and Isbrucker that were doing predominantly they were doing the majority of the work on this group. And they grouped the species within Corydoras into like morphotypes. So, ones with long snouts, ones with short snouts, etc. And they called them within that genus, within Corydoras, they gave them like elegans group, for example, as a label for particular types of morphotypes. So that was the prevailing view for many years. They actually only had Corydoras, Brochis, and Aspidoras as the valid genera. There was no Scleromistax valid at that point. So that was, as I said, the view for quite a lot of years. And then in, I think, 2003, Marcelo Brito was a Brazilian ichthyologist. He published the phylogeny of the Corydoradinae. That resulted in certain clades within the subfamily, but it actually resulted in Brochis being synonymized into Corydoras. And technically speaking, that's still the case today, but Brochis, as I'm sure you're aware, is still used by a lot of aquarists. And he revalidated Scleromistax, so like Barbatus, they actually were placed back into their own genus. And then this paper came out in 2011. And it was actually predominantly a paper about the kind of mimetic groups, so the like all the different color groups in terms of the ones that share color patterns and how that affects how their ecology and other things. But as a result of that work, they came up with this, which is on screen now, which is the phylogeny of Corydoradinae. And essentially what it does is it gives you like a family tree of their ancestors and descendants. It's like an evolutionary tree. So as a result, that was based on DNA, I understand. It wasn't a morphology-based one like the Brito one. It was predominantly DNA-based one. So we ended with these lineages, these 9 lineages, as we call them. And it's like common parlance now with people who keep Corydoras. But it's only fairly, it's only 10 years ago. Not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. So what we ended up with essentially was it kind of proving or showing what we kind of already thought we knew, in that there are certain groups within Corydoras that are probably going to need their own genus names at some point, some of which there's already available names for, some of which there isn't. So essentially what they said was that lineage 1 was your true Corydoras, so that's your acute snouted ones, so Jeff Roy's, your acutus and things like that. Then we ended up with lineage 2 being the Aspidoras genus. Lineage 3, the Scleromistax, so your Barbatus, those types of big bearded ones. And then you've then got, from that point onwards, the other lineages, which are currently at the moment within Corydoras, that clearly forming separate groups, evolutionary groups. And like I said, some of them have already got names available if they get resurrected. So whoever eventually splits up Corydoras will end up probably resurrecting some of those names. So for example, the lineage 9 ones, the kind of short, round snouted ones, they've already got a Hoplosoma as an available name that could be used if it's deemed that some kind of morphology-based study kind of proves this phylogeny. We'll probably end up with those names being back in use again, and Corydoras will be really restricted to the acute snouted or saddle snouted species, as some people call them. And within that kind of range from like 4 round to 9 will either be some, as I said, either some new names in one case potentially, or some old names back in use again. So it will result potentially in it all being split up. It could mean that Brochis comes back. I think you can see Brochis there on lineage 8. That's not straightforward either, because just within that lineage 8, which there's already a name for Brochis, there's some subclades in there of those other species that you can see on that graph there, that chart, which possibly could end up with their own name too, or they could end up being called Brochis. So there's a lot of work to be done. This is a fantastic start, and it's allowed us to kind of look at them in the separate lineages rather than lumping them everything under Corydoras or Aspidoras, basically. But there's still a lot more work to do.
That's great. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that. There was a lot to looking at that when I first pulled it up. Very neat, though. Wow. Kind of nice when you have a study that isn't just morphology, and you get the genetics in there too to kind of confirm what people thought already. That's nice to know that you're on the right track with these things. That's really interesting. Thanks. All right, so now let's get into your Corys. So you have discovered and named some species, and there is, of course, a lot that people can read about that in the upcoming magazine, but why don't you give us a bit of an overview about that topic?
Yeah, so back in 1997, when my kind of interest in ichthyology kind of peaked, really. I'd been reading some of the old David Sands Captures of the World books, the loose leaf ones, the black ones, and I was reading some of the papers in there, and it really kind of inspired me to get more involved in that side of it's not the hobby, obviously, it's actually a profession, essentially. But it was something that I was really interested in, and I knew that there were quite a lot of Corydoras out there that weren't described as they are now. And and a kind of part of me wanted to get involved in ichthyology, but also kind of part of me as a younger man then were probably a bit impatient and wanted some of them to have names. So I thought, well, why don't I name some of them myself? So I came across two unnamed species in an aquarium shop, actually, one of which had got a code number by Hans Evers at the time. And I thought that they were really good example to work with, really. So I got in touch with the Natural History Museum in London, spoke to the head curator there, Oliver Crimmen, spoke to at Crystal Pond Keeper magazine, which isn't running now, and asked if they would be willing to let me submit a description naming these two species, essentially. And to my surprise, they agreed, which I was really surprised at, but thankfully they did. So I went along that path, really, and I got a lot of help from Oliver, who's still working at the museum in London. And also they got Stanley Weitzman, who sadly is not with us anymore, to review the paper as well. So got a lot of help, but also a lot of self-taught. And I drew up the descriptions, named two of them, one of after my son, Kane, that's why it's called Corydoras canei, or canei, some people pronounce it. And I named the other species after Oliver, the curator, Oliver Crimmen, so that's Crimmen or Crimmen, depending on how you pronounce it. So they were published in a magazine. I actually got quite a bit of stick from some of the scientists at the time for doing this. Because they felt that I, as an amateur, I shouldn't be doing this and I should leave it to the professionals, basically. Not all of them, but I did get, I've still got the letters, I think, actually, that I received on the subject.
Wow.
But people like Stanley and Oliver were really supportive. When they were described, I think the magazine came out, I think, in December 1997, and at that point, my daughter had not been born, so she was born that month, but later on after it was published. And I kind of, ever since then, going back all those years, I as a kind of parent who loves both my children the same, it just didn't sit with me that I'd named some a species after my son and not after my daughter. Well, I love them both equally the same, as I say. And it kind of didn't sit well with me. After many years down the line, I've decided that I wanted to put that right. And I chose an undescribed species. This has got a CW code number at the time. Chose that as the one that I wanted to work with, a really interesting species, actually, in its own right, regardless of what it's called. And I reached out to my friend, Dr. Louis Tenkach, who's basically the leading expert now in the subfamily, and also Rebecca Bentley, who's learning to be an ichthyologist, and basically asked if they would come on board and help me describe the species and if they would be okay with me naming it after my daughter. And thankfully they said yes to both those things. So that came out a few months ago now, which I was really over the moon about, not just to have described the species, because that in itself is an honour, but to be able to honour my daughter as well. So it's took some time to sort it out and redress the balance, shall we say, but I got there.
That's great. That is really a neat story. I mean, to be able to both discover and describe species like that, that's so exciting. And then to get the chance to name them, what a cool thing. So in addition to all of this, you also have a book that's just come out. And there's a graphic of that behind you. So, and I will also put a link to where people can find this when we put up the video. So yeah, tell us about your new book.
Yeah, I've got the printer's draft copy here. You might not be able to see it, but
there it is. There it is. Oh, exciting.
With a strange photo of me on the back. I don't know if it's showing properly or not. But yes, it's finally done. It can be ordered now. It'll probably be sent out around middle of this month, middle to end of this month. It's a book called Twins, as you can see on the screen there.
Mhm.
And it's essentially a book on 3 families of naked catfishes from South America. So it's the Phylogenidae, the Heptapteridae, and the Pseudopimolodidae. So it's essentially like the bumblebees, the long-whiskered catfish, the Pimolodus. It's that super family, really. And it's absolutely full of high quality, not my photos, by the way. There are some of my photos, but there's some really fantastic photographers in there that have been kind enough to let us use their photographs. Hundreds of different photographs of the species.
Wow.
Got lots of information about them. It's a beautiful book. It really is a beautiful book, and there's a lot of information in as well. So I'm really pleased with it.
That's great. That must have been so exciting. Did this take a while to put together, I'm assuming?
It did in a sense that I started to write it. I think it was probably October last year. So it really, it's not that long.
No.
But a lot of it was because I couldn't do anything else because we're in lockdown due to COVID.
Right.
So I weren't going anywhere and I couldn't really do anything. So I thought, well, I might as well. I've always wanted to do a book ever since I started, back when I was a young boy. So I thought I might as well do one.
You're not going to have more time at any point, so you might as well.
Exactly. I thought I might as well do it now. And I hooked up with a really good publisher and typesetter and designer called Andreas Tanke from Germany. And he's put it together for me. It's a really beautiful book. I'm really pleased with it.
That's really exciting. Yeah, it is a huge accomplishment to put together a book, especially something as technical as this. And I can't wait to see it and see all the, I'm sure, fabulous pictures. This will be great because it's such an interesting group of fish.
Yeah.
Now, I'd imagine some of the species, anyways, that you discuss in this book probably face threats in the wild. What would you say the proportion of fish that you cover in your book are endangered at some level? And what role can representation in the aquarium hobby play in protecting them?
I think out of the 3 families that it covers, the family that's at most immediate risk is the Pimolodidae.
Yeah.
So mainly the large migratory and food, which are often food species.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the like your Brachyplatystoma species, your Zungaro, and some others. They're the ones that are really struggling at the moment, and in some rivers they're no longer present.
Wow.
They're at risk due to dams. So because some of these are migratory catfish that travel thousands of kilometers to spawn and then to return to where they started. The dams obviously can stop that happening. And there's even some evidence to show that even though you might have one species that covers a huge area and a certain amount of rivers within the basins, there's evidence to show that some of them only, like similar to what some salmon do, only return to a particular river where they started. And if there's a dam on that river, they either can't get to the spawning grounds or they can't get back. And then they're being overfished as well. And also in hybridized in farms in South America. To try and produce them for food, which in a sense is a good thing because it means that the wild true species aren't being eaten as much. But what's happened, unfortunately, is some of the hybrids have escaped into the rivers. Some of those hybrids have also shown up in the aquarium hobby. Some of the hybrids are in the book.
Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So the hybridization farming, in a sense, can help in one way, but in another sense, it's not helping because it's mixing the genetic populations up.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, in terms of how the aquarium hobby can help, really, what would be the ideal solution is that if the farms could breed true species, and that the hobby could buy from those farms rather than wild stock, that would really help.
Definitely.
But unfortunately, other than the few hybrids that come, it tends to be wild stock because the breeders, the reason they hybridize is to get hybrid vigor. So if they cross the species, it reduces the chances of getting problems with the health while they're trying to raise them in cramped conditions and so on. It actually means that they have more of a chance of raising more of the young. So that's why they tend to hybridize them. So in terms of those large catfish, in reality, really in the aquarium hobby, we're not really helping them by buying the true wild species stock. We're not.
Yeah, right.
To be honest.
Well, and that's the other thing. Some of these species are just so large, and with their migration patterns, they probably don't lend themselves well at all, really, to being kept in the trade, and that can, I suppose, present its own problems. But yeah, interesting stuff.
There's a school of thought that says if you not just with these fish, but if there's a demand, a sustainable demand from aquarists to get these species, then people will look after them more in the natural environment.
Right.
And because it's valuable to keep that kind of stock going, to have a viable, continuous income.
Right.
So that, I'm not saying that isn't a valid point of view, because in a lot of cases it is, particularly the smaller species.
Mm-hmm.
I just think with these large migratory species, they're under so many threats from these other things that I'm not sure that's right for them, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, they really do have a lot of threats to face out there, but amazing to have them all covered in a book, which is really fantastic. So that's nice. It's a good baseline to have. It's really important. Well, this was cool stuff. I'm going to end on something fun. So I read somewhere that you were hospitalized by a shovel-nosed catfish. This sounds like a story we need to hear.
Yeah, so back when I was in my novice days as an aquarist, early doors, I ended up at that point, rather than the small tank I started with, I ended in 2-3 foot tanks in my bedroom. And I thought those were huge, these big 3 foot tanks, massive. Right. I needed a big catfish now. And in my youth, thought that it would be a good idea to buy a tiger shovelnose catfish for one of these tanks. I think when I bought it, it was a baby. It was about, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches long. This catfish, it was an actual baby. And as I quickly learned, it quickly grew, and it got to about 15 inches long, this fish, and the tank clearly just wasn't big enough for them.
No.
So I went back to the shop and said, look, I can't house the fish. Would you allow me to return it? Yeah, no problem. Bring it over. We'll rehome it. Yeah. So I nets it out, puts it in the bucket, walks over to the shops. It was only over the road from where I lived. Put the bucket on the floor. The fish jumped straight up in the air and landed on the floor. My first instinct was to grab hold of the fish.
Yeah.
And I grabbed all of it around the pectorals. It stuck its toe spine straight into my finger, and it couldn't pull it out because of the hooks that point towards the base of the fin.
Yeah.
So I put it into the tank, it thrashed, and it eventually had to snap off its spine, which obviously I felt really bad about. I was only a young man, I didn't know any better. It left the spine in my finger. And couldn't get it out, and then very quickly it started, my hand started to swell up.
Oh yeah.
I was getting all the tingling sensations because of venom in the pectoral spine bases anyway. So the venom was taking effect. So I ended up going up to the hospital with this swollen, tingling hand with this spine sticking out of my finger. And obviously, when I explained to the hospital what had happened, they looked at me as though I was drunk. Couldn't really understand what I was trying to explain to them, and when they eventually realized that I wasn't making it up, they started taking it seriously. They couldn't pull it out. It was basically lodged. It hit my bone, it hit the guider, and it was lodged in my flesh. So they were asking me what species it was. Thankfully, because I was a fish nerd, I could tell them the scientific name of the fish.
Right.
So they ring this Centre for Tropical Diseases up in London or something.
Wow.
Told them the name, see if they needed to do anything in terms of the treatment. And I think they basically said, watch out for allergic reactions, give him painkillers, and you need to get it out.
Yeah. Which
was very difficult. It took them a lot. What happened was, as soon as they put the numbing injections to try and cut it out with the finger, it neutralized the painkillers straight away, the venom. Or the effects on my body neutralize it, whatever that was. and it took a lot of getting out. So it was it was quite painful. It was more of discomfort and more, how are they going to get it out?
Right.
They couldn't just pull it out.
No, nope.
So they ended up cutting it out very carefully with and like I said, I felt everything because the anesthetic didn't work. They eventually got it out. They left some of the hooks inside because they couldn't get the little barbs out and sewed it up. And every now and again, it itches, even now, all these years later.
It's a reminder, just a little reminder.
Yeah, of my stupidity, yes.
That's a great story. So if you're going to grab a shovel-nosed cat, don't do it by the pecs.
Yeah,
okay,
don't grab one, basically, yeah.
All right, good stuff. Well, thanks for sharing, Stephen. Like I said, I will make sure that we share the links to your book and where people can get this in the comments, so they can participate in this. So it'll be great. And yeah, they can look forward to seeing and reading your article in the upcoming issue of Amazonas. If you're looking for which one that's going to be, it's the one with Polypterus on the cover. And Stephen's Cory article is in there, which is very cool. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time, despite the time zone differences. And
you're welcome.
It's great. And we'll let you know when it's up.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye.